I'm really curious to hear your story. Please tell me more.
I was standing in the corner of the party room with a paper plate in my hand when it happened. The moment that still burns in my mind like a bad movie I can't shut off. My name is Jason. I'm 32, and all I wanted was for my son's 6th birthday to be a happy memory for him. Balloons, party hats, a dinosaur cake he'd been talking about for weeks. The whole deal. But as I walked toward the dessert table to get him a slice, I noticed the cake was missing. At first I thought one of the staff had moved it to the back to cut it. Then I saw it. In the trash. Face down.
That's unbelievable.
Smashed. And my sister, Rachel, was standing right there, leaning against the counter like she owned the place.
No way.
Scrolling through her phone with that smug half-smile she reserves for moments she knows will hurt. I asked her what happened, trying to keep my voice calm even though my heart was pounding. She didn't even look up, just shrugged and said, "He didn't deserve it anyway." Like it was a joke. Like my son's birthday cake being thrown away was some kind of moral lesson.
Are you serious?
I felt my stomach twist, a mix of anger and disbelief. My son was in the corner playing with his little friends, completely unaware that his special moment had just been trashed, literally. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was stare at Rachel, trying to process what I'd just heard. I asked her again, slower this time, if she had something to do with it. She finally looked up, rolled her eyes, and said, "Relax, Jason. It's just cake." It wasn't just cake. It was the look on my kid's face when he'd been telling everyone about his birthday for the last month. It was the fact that I had spent hours the night before setting up decorations because no one else in the family offered to help. It was the way Rachel had been taking little shots at me all day. Comments about how some people go overboard, or "it's not that deep, he's just a kid." And now this. I could feel every muscle in my body tense up. I didn't want to start a scene with kids running around, so I went over to my son, told him we were leaving, and packed up what little was left of the party favors. I texted the parents of the other kids, made some excuse about him not feeling well, and got us out of there before Rachel could say anything else. The drive home was quiet. My son was clutching the dinosaur figurine that came with the cake topper, asking why everyone had to go home early. I told him we'd have our own little party later, just the two of us, and we'd get a new cake. He smiled, which somehow made me feel both relieved and even angrier at the same time. Relieved because he was okay, but angry because he shouldn't have had to be. That night, I sat in my living room long after he went to bed, staring at the phone, waiting for someone, anyone, in my family to call and ask what happened. No one did. But the next morning, my phone rang. It was Mom. She didn't ask about my son, didn't apologize, didn't even acknowledge what had happened. Her voice was shaky, but not with guilt, with panic. "Jason," she said, "I need you to talk to the venue before they cancel Rachel's wedding." I just sat there, stunned, the phone pressed to my ear. She was calling me about Rachel's wedding? Less than 24 hours after my son's birthday had been ruined? I asked her if she was seriously not going to say anything about what happened yesterday. She went quiet for a moment and then said, "Look, I know Rachel can be harsh sometimes, but this is her big day coming up and we can't have any drama with the venue." Something inside me snapped at that moment. It wasn't just yesterday. It was every holiday where Rachel's preferences came first. Every family photo where she got to be in the center because she's the firstborn. Every time I'd been told to just let things go for the sake of peace. My jaw tightened as Mom kept talking about deposits and deadlines and how the venue manager was threatening to cancel because Rachel hadn't paid the balance yet. She wanted me to call, smooth things over, maybe even cover the cost until Rachel sorted things out. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just told her I had to think about it and hung up. Then I sat there for a long time, staring at my son's little toy dinosaurs scattered across the floor, feeling this strange calm settle over me. For years, I'd been the one to keep things running smoothly, to fix things when Rachel messed up, to be the reasonable one. But now, I wasn't sure I wanted to fix anything. And that's when the doorbell rang. I opened the door expecting maybe a neighbor, maybe a package. Instead, It was my dad standing there with his arms crossed, looking irritated like I'd personally inconvenienced him just by existing. He didn't even say hello, just brushed past me into the living room like he owned the place. "We need to talk about Rachel's wedding," he said, glancing at the toys on the floor like they were some sort of offense. I just stood there for a moment, still processing the fact that the man who hadn't once checked on his grandson after yesterday's disaster was now in my living room to talk about money for his favorite child's big day. I asked him straight out if he knew what happened at my son's party. He shrugged, literally shrugged, like he was talking about a weather report. "Kids are resilient," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "What matters now is making sure your sister's wedding doesn't turn into a circus." That word, circus, hit me harder than I expected. Because to him, that's what my kid's ruined birthday was. Just noise, just an inconvenience. He sat down on my couch like he was preparing for a lecture and started explaining how the venue had called him too, how they were concerned about payment and threatening to cancel if they didn't get the balance. He leaned forward, looked me right in the eye, and said, "You're good with people, Jason. You always smooth things over. Can't you just take care of this? You make more money than Rachel. It's nothing to you." There it was. The unspoken family rule said out loud. Jason fixes things. Jason sacrifices. Jason makes it right because he can. I asked him why Rachel wasn't taking care of her own wedding bill, and he sighed like I was being dense. "She's under a lot of stress," he said. "Planning a wedding is expensive. She's had to cut back her hours at work." I reminded him that Rachel had chosen to cut her hours at work to focus on herself, and had spent the last 3 weekends going on spa days with her friends, something she bragged about in the family group chat. He ignored that, changed the subject, and started talking about how this wedding is important for the family's reputation and how people will talk if it gets canceled. That's when my son walked into the room, still in his pajamas, hair sticking up on one side. He saw my dad and smiled shyly, holding up his toy dinosaur. "Grandpa, look," he said, clearly trying to show off his favorite toy. Dad barely glanced at him before going back to his speech about Rachel. My son's smile faltered, and he went back to his room quietly. I watched him go, and something in me hardened. I told my dad I wasn't sure I wanted to help with Rachel's wedding, not after what happened yesterday. His expression changed instantly. Gone was the calm, reasonable father. He frowned and said, "Don't be petty, Jason. This is bigger than a cake. You know how Rachel is." She didn't mean it. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I asked him if he would have said the same thing if someone had ruined Rachel's wedding cake. He didn't answer. Instead, he stood up and said, "I really hope you're not planning to hold the family hostage over this." Then he left, slamming the door behind him. That night, Mom called again. This time she tried a softer approach. She told me she understood why I was upset, but I needed to think about the bigger picture. "You know how your sister is," she said, echoing Dad. "She's always been difficult. But this wedding is her dream, Jason. If the venue cancels, she'll never forgive you." I told her it wasn't my responsibility to fix Rachel's mistakes. There was a pause on the line, and then Mom said something that made my blood run cold. "If you don't step in, your father and I will have to use the savings we were keeping for your son's future. Is that what you want? For him to miss out on college because you couldn't let go of some cake?" I didn't even know they had savings set aside for my son. I asked her why they hadn't told me about it before, and she brushed it off, saying it was meant to be a surprise later. But now, apparently, it was leverage. I ended the call before I said something I couldn't take back. The next few days were a blur of passive-aggressive group chat messages and relatives calling me to be the bigger person. My aunt texted me a paragraph about family unity. My cousin called to say Rachel was crying and felt attacked. Rachel herself didn't bother contacting me directly, but she posted on social media about toxic people trying to ruin the happiest day of my life. It didn't take a genius to figure out who she meant. Meanwhile, my son kept asking when we could have his real birthday cake. I promised him we'd do something special, just the two of us, that weekend. We went to a little bakery downtown, picked out the biggest chocolate cake they had, and celebrated in our kitchen with party hats and streamers I put up myself. It was simple, but it made him so happy. Watching him laugh with frosting on his face made me realize how long I'd been letting my family's drama dictate my happiness. A few days later, Mom showed up at my house unannounced. She came in looking like she'd been crying, sat down at the table, and launched straight into her plea. The venue says if we don't pay by Friday, they'll cancel. Your father is furious. Rachel is devastated. Please, Jason, you're the only one who can stop this. I asked her what Rachel had said about my son's birthday. She hesitated, then said she feels bad. I told her that wasn't good enough. If Rachel wanted my help, she could come over, look me in the eye, and apologize, not just to me, but to my son. Mom didn't like that. She said I was putting conditions on family love. I stayed firm. I told her that love goes both ways, and right now, all I saw was everyone expecting me to sacrifice, while Rachel got whatever she wanted. Mom left looking disappointed, and not even an hour later, I got a text from Rachel. Stop trying to control everything. It's not my fault your kid can't handle a little disappointment. Pay the venue or don't, but stop making this about you. I stared at that message for a long time. Then I screenshotted it and sent it to Mom and Dad with one sentence. This is what your devastated daughter thinks. Mom didn't reply. Dad sent a single text. We'll talk later. I knew what that meant. Another confrontation was coming, and I was done backing down. 2 days after Rachel's text, I came home from work to find an envelope taped to my front door. No name, no return address, just my first name scribbled across it in Mom's handwriting. I pulled it off, walked inside, and opened it on the kitchen counter. Inside was a folded letter and a bank statement. The letter was short, almost cold. It said that since I had refused to support the family in their time of need, Mom and Dad had decided to withdraw the savings they'd been keeping for my son and use them to cover Rachel's wedding balance. The bank statement showed the withdrawal, tens of thousands of dollars, money I didn't even know existed until last week, gone. At the bottom of the letter, Mom had written, "We hope you will still come to the wedding and put this ugliness behind us." I stood there, staring at the paper, my hands shaking. My son was in the living room watching cartoons, completely oblivious to the fact that the money meant for his future had just been taken to fund a party he wasn't even excited about going to. My chest felt tight. It wasn't just about the money, it was the audacity. The decision had been made without even asking me, without even a conversation. I called Dad immediately. He picked up on the second ring, sounding annoyed. "I figured you'd call," he said, like this was all just an inevitable step in some plan. I asked him if he really thought it was okay to take money meant for his grandson and spend it on Rachel's wedding. He didn't hesitate. "It's not just Rachel's wedding, Jason. It's a family event. Your son will benefit too, being part of a happy occasion." I almost laughed because it was so absurd it didn't sound real. I told him my son didn't even understand what was going on, that he'd barely seen Rachel in the last year because she never made time for him. Dad's voice turned sharp. "This attitude is exactly why we didn't tell you about the savings sooner. You'd hoard it and make everything about your son when this is supposed to be about all of us." Hoard it. That word burned. This wasn't hoarding. This was planning for the future, for the kid they were supposed to love just as much as Rachel. But to them, his future was negotiable, a bargaining chip to keep the peace. When I got off the phone, I didn't even realize how hard I'd been gripping the counter until I saw the faint white marks on my hands. My phone buzzed again a few minutes later. This time it was Rachel. No apology, no acknowledgement, just a photo of her in a wedding dress at a fitting with the caption, "Thanks for finally stepping up. Knew you'd do the right thing eventually." I didn't respond. I couldn't. Instead, I went into my son's room, sat on the edge of his bed, and just watched him play with his Lego set. He looked up at me, smiling, and said, "Dad, when I grow up, I want to make cakes so no one ever throws them away. I felt something in my chest twist so hard I had to look away. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that letter, that smug text from Rachel, and my son's little face when he said that. It felt like I was back in high school again, being told to give Rachel the front seat, to give Rachel the last slice of pizza, to skip my plans because Rachel needed a ride. Except this time it wasn't a slice of pizza. It was my kid's future. A few days later, the betrayal deepened in a way I didn't think was possible. I got a call from the school. My son's kindergarten teacher sounded concerned. She said my parents had come by the school earlier that day, saying they were there to pick up their grandson early. Apparently, they told the staff that I had approved it, which I hadn't. Luckily, the school called me first to confirm, but the fact that they had tried to take my kid without telling me left me cold. I called Mom immediately. She sounded cheerful, like nothing was wrong. "We just wanted to take him shopping for a little suit for the wedding," she said. "You weren't answering your phone, so we figured we'd surprise you." I told her flat out she was never to take my son from school without my permission again. There was a long pause before she said, "Jason, you're overreacting. We raised you. We know how to take care of a child. This attitude is why Rachel says you're becoming impossible to deal with." It was like a switch flipped in my head. Impossible to deal with. That's what they called me when I stopped doing their taxes for free, when I told them I couldn't babysit Rachel's dog every weekend, when I dared to say no to anything that inconvenienced me. The next day, I got another letter. This one wasn't taped to my door, it was slid under it. Inside was an invitation. A wedding invitation. My name wasn't on it. Neither was my son's. The envelope had been addressed to me, but inside it said, "Mr. Jason plus guest." No mention of family, no mention of my son as ring bearer or anything else. It was a message, and I got it loud and clear. When I called Mom to ask if it was a mistake, she said, "Rachel wanted a small ceremony. Kids make things complicated." I asked her if she was seriously telling me that after taking my kid's savings to fund this wedding, he wasn't even welcome to attend. She said, "You're welcome to bring a guest. Maybe someone special. It's time you moved on and focused on your own life instead of being so wrapped up in your child." I hung up before I said something that would scorch the earth. I just sat in my quiet house for a long time, staring at that invitation on the table. It felt like my whole life had been leading to this one boiling point. Every slight, every little favor I'd done, every time I'd bitten my tongue for the sake of peace. This was the line. That night, as my son slept, I opened my laptop and started going through my files, emails, receipts, copies of text messages. For years, I'd kept records because I was the one who handled family logistics, vacations, payments, even Rachel's rent once when she'd been between jobs. It was all there. Every time I'd bailed her out. Every time I'd quietly paid for something so she wouldn't face consequences. I sat there until 2 in the morning, piecing it all together like a puzzle, my anger cooling into something sharper, something more deliberate. By the time the sun came up, I knew one thing for sure. They might have taken my son's savings, but they weren't going to take my dignity. Not this time. And that's when Rachel herself showed up at my door. Rachel didn't knock. She just stood there on my porch like she'd been waiting for me to open the door. Her arms were crossed, and she was wearing that same smug half smile I'd seen at my son's party. I thought about not letting her in, but before I could decide, she said, "Can we talk?" Her tone was casual, like we were discussing what to have for lunch instead of the fact that she'd just gutted my trust and used my kid's future savings as her wedding fund. I stepped aside without saying a word, and she walked in, glancing around my house like she was checking for dust. She sat down at the kitchen table without being asked, leaned back in the chair, and started scrolling her phone like she wasn't in the middle of detonating what was left of our relationship. "So," she said finally, "I hear you're mad." Mad. That word sounded so small compared to what I was feeling. I sat across from her and asked if she had any idea what she'd done to me, to my son. She looked at me like I was being dramatic and said, "Jason, you're acting like they stole from you. Mom and Dad were just reallocating family resources. And honestly, you should be glad it's going to something meaningful. You can always make more money for your kids' college, but my wedding only happens once." I stared at her, wondering if she really believed what she was saying or if she just enjoyed twisting the knife. She kept talking, explaining how stressful wedding planning had been, how expensive everything was, how she had to cut work hours because she needed to be present for fittings and tastings. The more she talked, the more I realized she didn't see me as her brother. She saw me as a resource, a tool to be used to smooth out the bumps in her life. When I didn't say anything, she put her phone down and said, "Look, I get that you're hurt, but this isn't just about you. The family needs you to step up. You've always been the responsible one. It's who you are. And let's be honest, Jason, it's not like you had big plans for that money anyway." That last sentence hit me like a punch. I stood up and told her to leave. She acted surprised, like I was overreacting, but when she saw I wasn't joking, she rolled her eyes and muttered, "Fine, just don't ruin the wedding with your mood." Then she walked out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. After she left, I sat at the table for what felt like hours, staring at the empty chair she'd just been sitting in. It was quiet, too quiet, and that's when it really hit me. I wasn't just angry anymore. I was empty, tired, done. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I didn't sleep. I just sat on the couch while my son slept in his room, staring at nothing. The next day at work, my boss asked if I was okay because I guess I looked as bad as I felt. I lied and said I was fine. Then came the family group chat. It started with Mom posting a picture of Rachel's engagement photos, followed by a caption, "So proud of our girl," counting down the days. Everyone chimed in with hearts and emojis. No one mentioned me. No one asked if I was coming to the wedding. No one even said my name. It was like I'd been erased from the family overnight. I quietly left the chat. No announcement, no message, just gone. A few hours later, I got a private text from Mom. "Why would you do that? You're making this harder than it has to be." I didn't reply. Over the next week, the silence from my side must have made them nervous because the phone calls started ramping up. First Mom, then Dad, then my aunt, then even my grandmother, each one delivering their own version of the same lecture. Family is everything. Rachel is sensitive. I need to be the bigger person, and so on. Every time I let the calls go to voicemail, I felt a little bit lighter and a little bit lonelier. The real low point came the following weekend. I had promised my son we'd go to the park, but when we got there, I saw Rachel and Mom sitting on a bench, sipping coffee. They looked up when they saw us, and Rachel smirked. "Oh, look who finally came out of his cave," she said loudly enough for me to hear. Mom didn't say anything, just gave me this look, a look that said I was being ridiculous, that I was the one causing all this tension. My son wanted to play, so I let him go to the swings while I stood off to the side. I could hear Rachel talking to Mom about wedding colors, laughing like none of this mattered. Then Rachel called out, "Hey Jason, you should smile more. You're going to look miserable in all the wedding photos." I didn't answer. I just took my son's hand, told him we were going to get ice cream instead, and left. That night, I broke down. I sat on the floor of my kitchen after my son went to bed and just let it all out. Years of being second to Rachel, years of swallowing insults, years of being the family fixer. I cried until I didn't have anything left, and then I just sat there in the dark, staring at the fridge. But somewhere in that quiet, something started to shift. The anger that had been boiling finally cooled, and what was left was clarity. They had taken everything they could from me: money, time, emotional energy, and they still wanted more. They wanted me to show up to that wedding, smile, pretend everything was fine, and let Rachel walk all over me again. I wasn't going to give them that. The next morning, I started taking small steps. I called the bank to open a new account just for me and my son, separate from anything my parents could access. I spoke to my HR department about setting up an education fund through work so no one could touch his future again. I went through every shared bill and subscription I had with my parents, phone plans, streaming accounts, even the joint Costco membership, and one by one, I removed myself. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. Mom noticed, of course. She called me that evening, furious. "Are you trying to punish us?" she demanded. I stayed calm and told her I was just taking care of my own responsibilities. She accused me of abandoning the family. I didn't argue. I just said, maybe that's what needs to happen. After that, the call stopped. The silence this time felt different, heavier, but also freeing. One night, I sat down with my son and told him we might not be going to Aunt Rachel's wedding. He thought about it for a moment and said, "That's okay. Can we have cake that day instead?" I smiled for the first time in what felt like weeks and said, "Yeah, buddy, we can have as much cake as you want." And that's when I got the email, an official one from the venue itself. It wasn't addressed to me, but I was CC'd, probably by accident. It was a notice of possible cancellation due to a payment dispute and unprofessional communication from the client. I read it twice, my heart thudding in my chest. Rachel's perfect wedding was about to fall apart, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt a flicker of control again. Not revenge, not yet, just control. I closed the laptop slowly, already feeling the beginning of a plan taking shape in the back of my mind. Because if my family thought they'd seen me at my worst, they hadn't seen anything yet. Something changed in me after that email. For weeks I had been moving through life like a ghost, weighed down by every insult, every passive-aggressive comment, every time they had made me feel like the problem. But now I had proof that the perfect image they were clinging to, the dream wedding, the family unity they kept throwing in my face, was already crumbling on its own. And for once, I didn't feel powerless. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, made pancakes with my son, and actually enjoyed breakfast. Not rushed, not distracted, but present. I think he could tell something was different because he kept grinning at me and saying, "You're not sad today?" I wasn't. When I got to work, I threw myself into my projects in a way I hadn't in months. My boss noticed and asked if something good had happened. I just smiled and said I was making space for better things. By the end of the week, I'd closed a big deal that earned me a bonus. It wasn't life-changing money, but it felt symbolic, like life was giving me back some of what had been taken. I used part of that bonus to book a small weekend trip for me and my son. Nothing fancy, just a cozy cabin by the lake a few hours away. We spent the weekend fishing, building campfires, and eating marshmallows until we were both sticky and laughing. For the first time in months, I didn't think about Rachel, the wedding, or the family drama. It was just me and my boy, and it felt right. When I got back, my phone was full of missed calls and messages. Mom had sent a long text about how the family was hurting without me and how I was breaking Rachel's heart. I read it once, then put the phone down. I didn't reply. Instead, I kept building my life outside of them. I signed my son up for a weekend soccer program and went to every practice, cheering from the sidelines. I started cooking again, experimenting with recipes we could make together. At night, after he went to bed, I worked on a side project I'd been putting off for years, an app I'd always wanted to launch, but never had the time or energy to finish because I was too busy fixing everyone else's problems. As the weeks passed, I felt stronger, calmer, sharper. The constant knot in my stomach started to unwind. Then one day, I got an unexpected email from the venue again. This time I wasn't just CC'd, it was sent directly to me. The manager said she knew I was related to the couple and asked if I could help mediate because Rachel had been unresponsive and rude during their last interaction. She said the deadline for payment was approaching and hinted that the venue was seriously considering canceling the reservation if things didn't improve. I stared at that email for a long time. This was it. The moment my family had been waiting for me to swoop in and save them. Only this time, I didn't feel the usual pressure to fix everything. Instead, I wrote back politely, thanked her for the update, and said I was not involved in any financial or planning decisions for Rachel's wedding. Then I closed my laptop, poured myself a glass of water, and went outside to play catch with my son. That night, I got a string of frantic texts from Rachel. Why would you tell them you're not involved? They think we can't pay now. Do you want my wedding to get canceled? I didn't reply. The next day, she sent another message. Fine. If you want to be a jerk about it, just know you're dead to me after this. I sat there reading it, and instead of feeling crushed, I felt free. Like a weight had been lifted. That freedom made me bold. I decided to take a social media break, not to avoid them, but to reclaim it. I cleared out my friend lists, archived old family photos, and posted a single update, a picture of me and my son at the lake, smiling with the caption, "Best weekend ever." No tags, no context, just us. Within an hour, my aunt texted, "Looks like someone's finally moving on." Good. As my personal life improved, so did my work. My boss called me into his office one afternoon and said he was impressed with my recent performance and wanted to recommend me for a senior position that had just opened up. It would mean more responsibility, but also a big salary bump and more control over my schedule, which meant more time with my son. I accepted. When I told my son about the promotion, he cheered and said, "Does that mean we can get more cake?" I laughed harder than I had in weeks. But not everything was quiet. Mom showed up at my house again a few days later, looking exhausted. She said Rachel had been calling her nonstop, crying, saying the venue was about to cancel because the final payment still hadn't been made. Mom begged me to just cover the balance for the sake of peace. I told her calmly that I wasn't involved and wouldn't be helping. She said, "If this wedding falls apart, Rachel will never forgive you." I said, "Then I guess she won't forgive me." For once, I didn't feel guilty when she left looking disappointed. That night, I sat down at my laptop and finished the last piece of my app. After months of work, I finally hit publish. It went live the next morning, and by the end of the week, it had gained traction, more downloads than I expected, some positive reviews, even a feature on a small tech blog. My confidence grew with every notification. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just surviving. I was building something for me and my son, something no one could take away. And then came the real turning point. A few days later, the venue manager called me directly. She said Rachel had finally called back, but had yelled at the staff and threatened to take her business elsewhere if they didn't give her more time. The manager said she wanted to know if there was another point of contact for the family because she wasn't sure she could keep dealing with Rachel. I thanked her for letting me know and said I wasn't involved. But this time, I didn't hang up right away. I asked a few polite questions about how the payment process worked, what the deadlines were, what would happen if the balance wasn't paid. The manager explained everything patiently, probably thinking I was trying to help. I took careful notes. By the time I hung up, I knew exactly how much time Rachel had left before the booking was canceled. That night, I sat in my office after my son went to bed, staring at those notes. For weeks, I had been quietly rebuilding my life, step by step. Now I was in a position to do something more. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but to finally make it clear that I wasn't their safety net anymore. And as I closed my notebook and turned off the light, I realized something. I wasn't just ready to move on. I was ready to take control of the ending. And Rachel had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was like the fog that had hung over me since my son's ruined birthday had finally burned away, leaving nothing but sharp focus. I knew what I needed to do, not just to protect myself and my son, but to finally draw a line that couldn't be crossed. My first step was subtle. I called the venue manager back, not to interfere, but to ask a few more detailed questions under the guise of being a concerned family member. I asked about the specific payment deadlines, the cancellation policy, and whether they required anything in writing to release the booking if payment wasn't made. She told me that because of Rachel's behavior, they were already considering terminating the contract. She sounded almost relieved that someone in the family was being polite and professional for once. I thanked her and asked if she would be willing to copy me on all future correspondence regarding the booking, just so there's no miscommunication. She agreed, probably assuming I'd be the mediator. And just like that, I had a direct line to every development, every deadline, every official warning. With that information in hand, I started to prepare. I didn't tell anyone what I knew. Not my parents, not my aunt, not even my closest friend. I kept my replies to family messages short and polite, never giving them anything they could twist into a fight. The calmer I was, the more desperate they seemed to become. Rachel sent another text a few days later, saying, "You can still fix this before it's too late." I didn't reply. Instead, I began documenting everything. Every message, every email, every call log. I even saved the voicemail Mom left where she admitted they had taken my son's college fund for the greater good. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about building a record, proof that I wasn't the villain they were painting me to be. In the meantime, my work promotion came through officially. My new salary hit my account for the first time, and it felt like validation for every long night. Every time I'd put in extra effort while Rachel coasted through life. With my finances more secure than ever, I opened a dedicated education trust for my son. This time, no one but me had access. The more I strengthened my own position, the more the power dynamic began to shift. At the same time, I started to notice cracks forming in Rachel's carefully curated image. One afternoon, I ran into a mutual acquaintance, a florist I'd worked with on a charity event, who mentioned that Rachel had stopped by her shop looking for last-minute arrangements but had been rude and demanding. The florist said Rachel had complained loudly that she couldn't find anyone competent to work with her. Apparently, word was starting to get around in the local event planning community that Rachel was difficult to deal with. That was interesting. I didn't spread rumors. I didn't have to. Rachel was digging her own hole, and all I had to do was step back and let it get deeper. A few days later, the venue manager sent a formal notice. If payment was not received by the end of the month, the booking would be canceled and the deposit forfeited. I knew Rachel hadn't made the payment because she'd been too busy complaining about how unfair it was that she had to pay anything at all. This time, I didn't just sit on the information. I printed the notice out and put it in a folder with all my other documentation. I wasn't ready to use it yet, but I wanted to be ready when the time came. Then something unexpected happened. Mom called and asked if she could come over alone, without Dad. When she arrived, she looked tired, older somehow. She sat down at my table and said, "I don't know what to do with your sister anymore. She's out of control." It was the first time I had heard her say anything even remotely critical of Rachel. She admitted that Rachel had maxed out 2 credit cards paying for things she didn't actually need for the wedding and had started asking Mom and Dad for more money they didn't have. Mom looked at me with watery eyes and said, "I think we made a mistake taking your son's savings. We just wanted to make things easier for her. But it's never enough." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered the letter, the threats, the way she had tried to guilt me into paying for Rachel's mess. So I told her calmly that she had a chance to make things right. She could start by talking to Rachel and making her apologize, not just to me, but to my son. And she could replace the money they had taken, even if it took time. Mom nodded slowly, but I could tell she wasn't ready to take that step yet. She said she'd think about it and left. That night, I received another email from the venue manager. This time, Rachel had missed a scheduled call entirely. The manager was clearly fed up and said this was her final courtesy notice before cancellation. It was like watching a storm roll in from a distance, knowing exactly when and where it was going to hit. I decided it was time to make my own move, quietly, carefully. I wrote a short, professional email to the venue thanking them for keeping me informed and letting them know that if the booking was canceled, I would be happy to discuss alternative arrangements for a future event. I didn't specify what event, just left the door open. It wasn't a promise. It was a seed. And while that seed was planted, I focused on my own life more than ever. My app started gaining serious traction, enough that a small investor reached out to me about potential funding. I found myself on calls with people who were excited about what I'd built, who respected me for what I could bring to the table. Meanwhile, my son was thriving. His teacher told me he'd become more confident, more engaged in class. At home, he laughed more, asked more questions, seemed lighter somehow. It was like we were both breathing easier now that we weren't constantly under the shadow of my family's drama. And then, just when things were starting to settle into this new rhythm, Rachel showed up again, this time furious. She pounded on my door until I opened it and stormed past me into the house. "The venue says they're going to cancel if I don't pay by Friday," she said, throwing her hands up. "You need to fix this. Call them. Tell them you'll cover it. Do whatever you have to do." I didn't answer right away. I just watched her pace around my kitchen, ranting about how unfair it was that weddings were so expensive, how ridiculous it was that she was expected to pay on time. When she finally stopped to catch her breath, I said, very calmly, "I'm not going to fix this for you. Not this time." Her mouth fell open. "You're serious?" "Yes." She glared at me for a long time, then said something that confirmed what I already knew. "If this wedding gets canceled, it's on you." She stormed out before I could reply, leaving the door open behind her. I closed it slowly, locked it, and stood there in the quiet. This was it. The moment I had been waiting for. The moment when they all made it clear that they weren't going to stop pushing until I pushed back. And for the first time in my life, I was ready, really ready, to push back in a way they would never forget. Because now I had the information, the leverage, and the calm, deliberate patience to use it. And when the deadline came, I wouldn't just be a spectator. I would be the one holding the final card. Friday morning came with a strange kind of stillness. I woke up before my alarm, made coffee, and stood by the kitchen window as the sun came up. I could feel it, this quiet, steady anticipation humming under my skin. Today was the deadline, the day everything came due, literally and figuratively. I sat down at my desk and opened my email. Right on schedule. There it was, the final notice from the venue, stating that if payment was not received by 5 p.m., the booking would be canceled and the deposit forfeited. They had CC'd me, as I had requested, which meant I had it in writing. I didn't reply right away. I let the clock tick for a few hours while I focused on work, taking calls and answering messages, all the while feeling this calm, methodical energy building inside me. Around noon, my phone started lighting up with texts from Mom. "Jason, please, just talk to your sister. The venue says this is the last chance. Don't let her big day be ruined." Then from Dad, "Step up. Be a man. Handle this." And finally, Rachel herself. "You have until 5. If you don't pay, don't bother coming to the wedding or talking to me ever again." I almost laughed at that one. The threat wasn't really a threat, it was a promise. At 4:45 p.m., I opened my laptop and drafted one simple, professional email to the venue manager. "Thank you for keeping me informed. I understand today is the final deadline for payment on the booking under Rachel. If payment is not received and the contract is terminated, please let me know as soon as possible. I would like to discuss reserving the venue for a future private event on a different date." I sent it, closed my laptop, and went outside to play soccer with my son until the sun dipped below the horizon. When we came back inside, there was a new email waiting for me. "Dear Jason, as of 5 p.m. today, no payment has been received from Rachel. The booking has been canceled in accordance with the contract terms, and the deposit has been forfeited. Please let us know if you would like to discuss a reservation for a future date. Best regards, venue manager." I felt this wave of quiet satisfaction wash over me. Not gloating, not petty, just final. That night, I posted a picture on social media of me and my son eating ice cream on the couch with a caption that simply said, "Good day." Within an hour, my phone buzzed with a call from Mom. I let it go to voicemail, then another from Dad. Ignored. Then a barrage of texts from Rachel, each one angrier than the last. "Are you happy now? "You ruined my wedding. You're disgusting. You'll regret this." I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I called the venue the next morning. I spoke to the manager directly and arranged to reserve the same date, but not for a wedding, for a private celebration dinner. I didn't give details, just locked it in and paid the deposit myself. Then I sent one single message to the family group chat. Since the venue was already booked for that day, I figured I'd use it. "You're welcome to come if you can be civil." The chat went silent for almost an hour. Then my aunt replied with a single shocked emoji. Mom finally called. This time, I answered. She started crying immediately, saying Rachel was inconsolable, that this would destroy her reputation. I stayed calm and told her that this was never about destroying anything. It was about finally showing them that I wasn't their safety net anymore. I reminded her of what she had said about taking my son's college fund for the greater good, and asked if she still thought that was fair now that it had come to this. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "Jason, you can't really go through with hosting your own event that day. It'll humiliate her." I told her that Rachel's humiliation wasn't my responsibility, just like her wedding wasn't mine to save. And then I hung up. Over the next few days, I finalized my plans. Nothing flashy, just a simple dinner for me, my son, and a few close friends who had been my real support system through this mess. People who actually showed up for us. I arranged for a custom cake to be made, a dinosaur cake, just like the one that had been thrown away at my son's party. When the day finally came, it felt almost surreal. I got texts from a few relatives saying they wouldn't be attending because it wouldn't be appropriate after what happened to Rachel. Fine, the people who mattered were there. We arrived at the venue early, and as soon as my son saw the cake, his eyes lit up. "You got it back," he shouted. "Better than before," I said, handing him the first slice. We spent the evening laughing, eating, and enjoying ourselves in a way I didn't think was possible just a few months ago. And as I watched my son blow out the candles on the cake, months late, but no less special, I realized that this was what I had been fighting for all along. Not revenge for revenge's sake, but peace. Halfway through the dinner, I got a notification on my phone. Rachel had posted on social media about the most painful day of her life, saying how she had been betrayed by her own brother. The comments were full of sympathy, but also questions about why she hadn't paid her own venue bill. I didn't reply. I didn't explain, because for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to. The people who mattered were right there in the room with me, smiling and eating cake. And Rachel's perfect day? That had been built on taking from us, and now it was gone. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't done either, because there was still one last thing I needed to do before I could finally close this chapter for good. The days after my little celebration were oddly quiet, like the air right after a storm. My phone barely buzzed, except for the occasional passive-aggressive message from relatives who clearly didn't know the whole story but wanted me to make amends. I ignored them. Then, on Monday morning, everything exploded. My cousin sent me a screenshot of Rachel's social media. She had posted a long, emotional rant about how her wedding had been stolen from her by someone who was supposed to be family. It was 3 paragraphs of vague accusations about betrayal and sabotage, ending with, "Some people would rather see me miserable than happy." Normally, the comments on Rachel's posts were full of supportive friends gassing her up. Not this time. People were asking questions. "Wait, didn't you have like a year to pay off the venue? Why would your brother be responsible for your wedding bill? Didn't your parents give you money for this already?" By the afternoon, Rachel had turned off comments entirely. Later that day, Mom called me, her voice hoarse from crying. She said Rachel had been humiliated, that she had friends dropping out of her bridal party, that the vendors were refusing to work with her because of unprofessional behavior. She said Rachel wasn't leaving the house, that she'd been crying nonstop. I listened quietly, then asked if Rachel had apologized to my son yet. There was a long pause before Mom said, "She's not ready to do that." "Then there's nothing to talk about," I said, and hung up. That night, Dad showed up at my house unannounced. He stood on my porch with his jaw tight, holding something in his hand, a check. He said it was the full amount they had taken from my son's savings. "Consider it paid back," he said gruffly. I asked if Rachel knew they were doing this. He said no, that she still thought she deserved that money. I took the check, but I didn't invite him in. I told him that money would be going directly into my son's education trust, and that from now on, there would be no more shared family funds. Dad didn't argue. For once, he just nodded and left. The next morning, I got an email from the venue manager. She thanked me again for being such a pleasure to work with and said if I ever wanted to book another event, they'd be happy to offer me a discount for being a respectful client. I laughed when I read it, not out of spite, but because it felt like the universe was putting a stamp on the whole ordeal, a quiet acknowledgement that I had chosen the high road, even if my family couldn't see it. Weeks passed. My app kept growing, my son kept thriving, and my house felt calmer than ever. Rachel, on the other hand, went radio silent. I heard through the grapevine that she had tried to rebook another venue for a much smaller ceremony, but several vendors had blacklisted her after the way she treated them. Apparently, she ended up getting married at the courthouse with just mom and dad present. No invitations were sent to me, and honestly, I was fine with that. One Saturday afternoon, a few months later, I was at the park with my son when I saw mom walking toward us. She looked tired but softer somehow. She said Rachel had finally moved on, but that she still refused to talk to me. Then she did something I didn't expect. She crouched down to my son's level, looked him in the eye, and said, "I'm sorry your birthday was ruined. That should never have happened." My son blinked at her for a moment, then said, "It's okay. Dad got me a better cake." Mom's eyes filled with tears. She stood up, looked at me, and said, "I hope one day you and your sister can work this out." I told her, calmly but firmly, maybe, but not if it means going back to the way things were. She nodded. For the first time, I think she understood that I wasn't bluffing, that I had built a life outside of their chaos and wasn't going to give that up. As she walked away, my son tugged on my sleeve and said, "Dad, can we go get another cake today? Just because." I smiled, picked him up, and said, "Yeah, buddy, let's make it a tradition." And as we walked back to the car, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't dreading the next family gathering, the next phone call, the next demand. Because I finally understood something that had taken me 32 years to learn. Peace doesn't come from keeping everyone else happy. It comes from choosing yourself, even when it makes everyone else uncomfortable. And I was done being uncomfortable. That night, I locked the check away in the safe, tucked my son into bed, and sat quietly in the living room with the lights off, feeling lighter than I had in years. Rachel might never forgive me. Mom might never fully get over it. The family might still whisper behind my back at holidays. But my son would grow up knowing that his father never let anyone throw away what mattered to him. Not his cake, not his future, not his dignity. And that, more than anything, felt like winning.